Welcome, everyone, to the Pick Six podcast, where we discuss the biggest stories in college football. I'm your host, Chris Chang, and joining me, as always, is my co host, Rudy Tamarchio. Rudy, we have entered the first week of October, and it was a freaky and frightful weekend for several top 11 teams. But before we talk about Upset Saturday, we have to get into our weekly Ross Dellinger segment. So, the Yahoo Sports writer is dropping another piece of breaking news this week in relation to conference realignment, this time dubbed Project Rudy. Not after our Rudy, but a different Rudy. It is a Super League-esque concept that is separate and more simplified than the one made public last week. It incorporates football programs of the four power conferences in a 70-team structure. The model preserves the four power conferences, expands the postseason, overhauls scheduling, and gives a tier revenue distribution, and most importantly, infuses as much as $9 billion of private capital cash into the system. Project Rudy is built on two somewhat simple concepts to increase revenue from television networks and corporate sponsors. One, to arrange more games between power conference programs by eliminating all games against Group of Five and FCS opponents, expanding the playoffs, and pitting blue blood powers more often against one another. The second aspect would consolidate the media rights of the 70 schools under one agreement, instead of the current structure of five different packages, one for each power league and Notre Dame. According to the proposal, school by school distributions would skyrocket. The revenues would be allotted equally. That separates the 70 programs into three tiers. Now, tier one would be the top 16 schools who earn revenue projections from about 130 million a year in year 4, escalating to 250 million in year 12, which is double what the SEC and Big 10's current distribution rates are. Then there would be tier 2, which would be the next 22 schools, which would earn revenue between 60 and 110 million, which would be a little similar to the SEC and Big 10 current contracts. And then lastly, there would be a tier 3, which would compose of 32 schools, which would earn projections of about 30 to 60 million, which would be similar to what the Big 12 and ACC are facing right now. Now, the model also features a relegation and promotion system to pave a way for schools to move up and down the tiers. However, one proposed model suggests that having 8 permanent members of Tier 1, a move presumably to placate to the biggest brands in sports. So, Rudy, what are you thinking about this new Super League proposal?
There are things that I like. There's things I don't like. Just like the last one we spoke about, I don't like the name. One, because I feel like I'm the better Rudy to begin with because I wasn't
Facts.
federally indicted for fraud. I didn't go to Notre Dame and
Thank
I stayed
God.
on side. So, all those things aside, there's some cool things here because we talked about this with the previous proposal too. The conferences still need to have a say, the conferences still need
Yes.
to be involved. I don't think you can have a realistic model and say, oh, we're just going to eliminate all of the conferences altogether. They're too big to fail,
Yeah, they
primarily the
are.
Big Ten and the SEC. But the way schools give away their, well, allow the conference commissioners and those administrations to have power over what they're doing, that makes total sense. Also, from the media rights negotiations that you talked about, it makes perfect sense that if you're going to consolidate power football under one college football under one governing body, you can't have different media deals. You can
That's
negotiate
true.
one across all of the media networks, and you can use some, just like how you talked about bringing regionality back to college football, you can keep that also in the media negotiations and how the distribution of those different games are aired. So you can go back to CBS primarily having Southeastern Conference games or teams from that market. You can go back to Fox doing the Big 12 and Big 10,
Yeah.
ABC handling the West Coast and the East Coast. Like hypothetically, that's something that you keep in house. And then the revenue distribution is great, but where you lost me is really with the relegation and the promotion, and also trying to make what, like 6 or 8 of the traditional teams protected. Like, I'm sorry, but there are no sacred cows anymore in college football. There are some that, yes, the name cachet, is above and beyond everybody else, but that product on the field isn't always going to be the superior one, as we learned last weekend with upsets up in Nashville.
It's a good
So,
word.
yeah,
Yeah, I think the permanent status of tier one is a way to kind of reel in some of those SEC blue bloods and those Big Ten blue bloods. To kind of agree with this because, in my opinion, what I think is happening is this is basically a way to save the Big 12 and the ACC. I don't know who necessarily. I mean, we know that the people who introduced this were former Disney execs, and then a few power brokers in the college football scene. but something tells me that some of their influence and some of the advisors maybe in their ears are coming from the Big 12 and the ACC because again, what is the incentive for the Big 12, the Big 10 and the SEC? There really kind of isn't much. Especially with the two currently mulling over breaking away on their own and um starting their own super league and their own conference. I think this is kind of all these discussions. I think as we are going through this season in the background, what a lot of people aren't recognizing is that there are probably several groups trying to fix college football because everyone understands that we are on a precipice, that we are teeter tottering. We could either go down a good road and it stays healthy and we can keep the college football we love, or college football, as we know it, will eventually die. It will cannibalize itself and it will turn to some monstrosity that we have no idea what it's going to look like. One thing I do know for certain, this is goodbye for the group of five. They would be completely taken out, which I think a lot of people in the industry, pundits I'm speaking of in particular right now, have been talking and pushing for that, a group of five playoff. I think that's kind of their answer. It's been a little overdue. I mean, how is a Tulane supposed to compete with a Bama or even let's just use UAB, right? A school within the state to compete with their in-state, which you can call it a rival because they play almost every year, but they're
Yeah,
not.
or even use an example like Liberty for what you were talking about. Like, they're in the top 25 and they're undefeated.
Yep.
But look, apples to apples, when you watch that product on the field, that team gets blown out by middle tier SEC, Big Ten, higher end, other Power Five conference, Power Four conference teams.
Yeah, and as I was reading the story, you could kind of tell that when they were interviewing Petiti and Sankey and different Radakovich, our own athletic director at UM, they got a bunch of quotes, which I love what Ross does because you could tell he's been working on this for a bit. But you could tell there's a bit of a power struggle going on between the Big Ten, the SEC versus everyone else. A lot of the ACC teams, Dan Radakovich said like this is inevitable. The Big Ten, Petiti is saying, I don't think this is the exact solution, but we're getting close. So it's very interesting to see them kind of like vying to see who survives. And I think if again, I've always said this, if the SEC and the Big Ten do depart, it would mean the end of college football.
Yeah,
And I think with them continuously meeting and building this alliance together, they're really kind of they're putting some chips in there. I'm not saying they're putting all their chips in that basket, but they're putting a lot. I mean, why do you meet with someone? You know what I mean? That many times. I think in its current format, the SEC and Big Ten would want going when we go to 14 teams. They want 4 auto bids each, right? Is that what they're asking for, Rudy? I'm pretty
I
sure.
believe so. And it's so insane because if you look at it, yeah, they're big brands. Yeah, they play well and they comprise a lot of the top 25 every single year, but that's not what makes college football entertaining. We talked about this before. When you watch what the product on the field of like the NFL looks like versus what college football is, you can't just it's one thing to be aggressive if you're the conference commissioners for the SEC and the Big Ten because you've kind of seen all this coming and you want to be the thought leaders on it and say, look, we don't want to be punished because we got our ducks in a row earlier than the other conferences did. But at the same time, you have to understand that you can't cut off your nose to spite your face because it's more holistic in college football. You need the little programs and you need those stories to make your product different than what the NFL is. If it's NFL 2.0, what's the difference between college football and the USFL and the UFL, for example?
No,
Nothing.
yeah. And I think another thing that a lot of people overlook is a lot of these intra-conference rivalries are a part of the sport and it's tradition. For example, Clemson always plays South Carolina, North Carolina, and I'm sorry, FSU and Florida always play together. You know what I mean? So you have this SEC ACC rivalry that's always going to happen, always kind of continue. And if you eliminate the ACC and the Big 12 and the SEC and the Big 10 take their ball and leave, you're going to lose a lot of those legendary traditional rivalries that we've had that make the sport so well. And what's crazy is then someone would say, okay, well then we'll just take the teams from the ACC and the Big 12 that allow us to keep some of these regionality things. The problem is some of these schools are interlocked with each other. So I believe like UNC and NC State, if they leave the ACC, they're kind of a package deal. Virginia Tech, if they leave, if one of them leaves, they're kind of a package deal. So it's kind of like you're basically, even if you take some of these high brands from the big brands from the ACC or the Big 12, they've kind of got a little brother that they kind of got to bring along. It's like if you want to go to
Yeah.
the party, you got to bring your big brother. And so to me, it's just very interesting that this proposal was made. I agree. Also, I think it's great because it just keeps the Power Four, so it incorporates all 69 teams in the Power Four conferences: the ACC, the Big 10, the Big 12, and the SEC plus Notre Dame. I think what we're really overlooking too is I think this needs to be the catalyst to get Notre Dame into a conference. It's like,
Yeah.
you know what? Now we're doing this because I think also the revenue portion of it is genius too, because even if let's just say, right? Let's just say we don't do this, but ESPN's like, okay, I'm going to bring everyone equal or as close to equal based on a merit system that we can get. At some point, you're going to have a league is going to go jump ship. Oh, look at those fireworks. That was interesting. You're going to have, I got to figure out how to turn that off. You're going to have a conference who's going to jump ship. So take, for example, the SEC right now is with, ABC and ESPN. But if ESPN and ABC are like, hey, yeah, we're gonna leave it at 80 million a year or whatever it is, and we're gonna pay ACC 80 million, what's to stop CBS from going, okay, cool, like you want to come back and we'll pay you 100 million? When you have this system that they're implementing, which would be you keep the conferences, but everyone gets the same based on this group because it's kind of like an NFL where everyone gets paid. I think you can really kind of eliminate that feast or famine nature when it comes to these media contracts.
You eliminate feast or famine. You also eliminate any other outside possibilities of another program, going on its own and making a hell of a lot of money. So this is a little bit of story time for you. Over the summer, I actually met with Dan Radakovich at because I had kind of a kooky idea. And my idea was that the University of Miami could have a docuseries kind of similar to like Welcome to Wrexham, for example, as a
That's
way
awesome.
to make revenue on the side in addition to their grant of rights and their media rights negotiation with their broadcast television. And the thought of that was Netflix or any other streaming service right now, they're hungry for live sports and they're jumping into the NBA and the NFL. And something that they don't
Yeah, Hard
have
Knocks. Look
is,
at Hard Knocks.
yeah, exactly. But something they don't have right now is college football.
Yeah.
So the closest thing that there is really on the streaming platform is Notre Dame because they have their deal with NBC and that includes Peacock. So you're talking about a $50 million a deal that Pete Bavacqua, their athletic director, who actually used to be the president of NBC Sports a couple of years ago, negotiates on their behalf every single year. But in this case, one thing that I was kind of joking about, down the road, what options leave for Miami on the table, should a show like that really, take off and Netflix sees a lot of interest in it, what's to say that a team like Miami or a program like Miami couldn't break away and go independent? Because if Netflix says,
It's
hey,
true.
we'll take the rights to all of your games. So now instead of being stuck in a television market, if you're a Miami fan in Washington State or over in Paris or whatever you want to do and watch a game, you can just turn on Netflix and it's right there and it's 100% share of voice. So you have the long form content of the docu series with all the human interest story that's coming through. And God, could you imagine what it's like to have cameras now with Cam Ward and these guys?
Oh my
It's
gosh.
must
Yeah.
see TV. And you can watch
Absolutely.
the games too. That's
Oh
kind
yeah.
of like the sky is the limit in terms of surpassing what a traditional conference can do for you.
Yeah.
Granted, the way that the table is playing out for college football, something like this would help level the playing field for everybody, and then also gives advantages to both the streaming services and to college football in general about negotiating on behalf of everybody. And now you can have additional media opportunities where it's not just traditional television, but you can actually get streaming services in on your deal.
I think the streaming idea is brilliant. I think my only concern would be there would probably be some sort of conflict of interest if Netflix was streaming games and then the current ACC media contract. I mean, we were independent at one point, so we would have to leave the ACC.
Right.
And I think it would be cool. I mean, I think that's territory that a lot of programs, i.e., your Georgias, your Alabamas, your big blue bloods, maybe I don't think an Ohio State would ever leave the Big Ten. But I think Georgia and Alabama, I speak of them in particular because they're so far ahead of every program in their conference in terms of brand awareness and brand equity that they would maybe consider going independent because for that exact reason, that the ability to market their program on different streaming services and things like that. And that's realistically, not to get on a nerdy side, but that's something that all the streaming services are really looking to get into, whether
Yeah.
it's Peacock, Netflix, even Disney Plus and Hulu.
Hulu. Yeah, you
They're
name it.
they're all looking to get more into live sports because they realize that's also where a lot of bread and butter is. I think the funny thing is each week we're getting a new idea. So I think we're about maybe 2 or 3 weeks away from nailing this battleship of conference realignment. We've hit A1, A2. I think A3 is next, and we're
Yeah.
just a few more points away from cracking this battleship and hopefully saving college football.
Well, this is exactly what you were saying. Is it's like, okay, the first proposal came out, and there's some things you like, there's things you don't like. The next one has some
Yeah.
of the ideas with the things that you didn't like from the first proposal, but there's more things you don't like here. So it's like they're just having these conversations so they could take the best of every single thing and come up with the
Yeah.
Goldilocks plan at the end.
I mean, that's what we have to do. I mean, we're just actually going to have to wait and see what happens. But with that out of the way, let's get back into some of our regularly scheduled programming, taking a look at our Canes. Miami enters the midpoint of the season with a bye week. I felt like we should take a look at the season so far, Rudy, and grade the team. So you and I put together a little report card to figure out where we thought everyone stood in terms of each position on the team. So do you want to go first or do you want me to go first?
I'll let you go first because I don't know the exact order. Like I know you have the graphic up on the screen, but I have
Yeah.
no idea what the order of it is
Well, you can
exactly.
go
So
bounce around, man. Like I know you have your list. Feel
yeah.
free to go around and look at it and let me know what you think, and then I can jump in. It doesn't really matter. Whatever we want to do.
All right, I'll go first, and I guess
Go
I'll
ahead.
go offense, and then if you want, like, you give yours, then give your defense first, and I'll give my defense afterwards. I guess.
Sure, we can start anywhere. Start. Feel free to start anywhere. You can start with the overall, whatever you want.
Gotcha. Well, I'll start offense first.
Okay.
Overall, offensively, I think we're both aligned here. We both went with an A
Yeah,
because look, it's number one offense in the country. Nobody can stop them for four straight quarters. So there's so many things offensively that Miami hasn't done. One in a very long time, and two, I would also argue that there's some things Miami has never done offensively that they're doing this year with this
this is
team. But
true.
by position, it looks a little different. So for my side on the offensive line, I gave them an A minus primarily because they're still playing, hurt. They're not 100%. You haven't seen
Right.
that line in its true form since week one against Florida because Jalen Rivers is still out hurt. And they've had Ryan Rodriguez out, who was also kind of a surprise going into the year. I think they've done a fantastic job giving Cam Ward time to throw. Sometimes Cam takes a little too much time, and that's not on the offensive line's fault. That's
That's
just
true.
football. That's just timing. In the running game, they haven't given the best push, but at the same time, I feel like the offense, their goals have been different every single game. In some cases, they're throwing to set up the run later. In some cases, it's just the terms of the game that's dictating what Miami is doing offensively. So I can't really fault them for that because in those short yardage situations when they are running in between the tackles, Miami's picking those up. If they get stopped on fourth down, it's because they're throwing the ball, they're doing something cute. It's not that they just get stuffed. So in every test this year that Miami's had where they just line up big uglies versus big uglies on the defensive line of the other team, Miami wins that battle every single time. Uh, looking, yeah, you want to go position by position? You want to let me know your side on that?
Yeah, so I'll start off. I gave them an A as well. We can go by position in a minute. I thought the same thing. I gave them an A for the same reasons you did. Miami's offense holds the number one spot in almost every major category, whether it's yards, points, average, all average except for rushing. I think they're just killing it. Miami has a 88% red zone scoring average, which I think is phenomenal. And then one thing I actually had to do the math because it's really hard to find stats on this, but I did the math because I'm Asian. And fun fact, Miami's quick drives, UM is averaging a score every 3 minutes. Like, so roughly once they get the ball within 3 minutes, they're scoring. So to me, I think that's a really, really, really good stat. And it's a really good thing to have in your back pocket for instances when you're down in the fourth quarter, like we were against Cal and
And
even
Virginia
and
Tech.
Virginia Tech. So God knows what will be against Louisville and Florida State. I mean, Florida State now. God, pray for them, please. But I thought that was a really interesting stat, figuring out that we were basically scoring within 3 minutes of getting the ball. Another thing is Cam Ward is having a Heisman season. I mean, let's just, can we just give, I mean, I know we can talk about it maybe next week, Ashton Genty and some others who are really making a name for themselves. But I think in terms of the overall, I mean, unless Genty puts up 2,500 yards, I think Cam Ward bringing UM back to prominence. I think us being undefeated so far and God willing, we stay undefeated. I think that will just naturally just clear the road for him in New York. Restrepo is on pace to have 1,000 yards this season, which I
Yeah.
thought was incredible. But let's go position by position. What did you think of the O line? You gave the O line what?
I already mentioned that part. That's the A minus. So give me
Yeah.
your O line, and then we'll go down the next position group.
All right, so for me, I gave the O line a B minus. The reason why is they look phenomenal against Florida. They look great against the cupcake teams. But when we got into conference play, there was a drop, and we've had a precipitous drop in that in other areas on our team, which I'll mention later on in terms of things we need to correct. But for me, I just haven't seen in the last 2 games. I haven't seen a push by the O line like we were seeing in the first specific 3 games compared to the last two, which has me a little worried. We also have an injury on the O line, and so I'm just like, I can't quite give them an A, but a B minus. That's where I'm at with the O line.
So we're a full letter grade across on each other. I went A
Exactly,
minus, you went B minus.
exactly. So what did you
Uh,
give the running back room?
I gave the running back room a B. I gave them a B because some of this is not really their fault because they haven't exactly had the chance to shine, given that Miami in 2 consecutive games had to throw themselves back into the game and to compete and to take the lead. So they've done a good job in terms of pass protection when they've been asked to do it. The only thing I'm saying the difference between a B and an A here is how they're being utilized. And I look at
Yeah,
it as Damian Martinez, I know people want to knock him, but I'll tell you, there is going to be the game where he's going to be needed, and Miami needs to put together a
that's
6 or 7 minute drive to kill clock. I can't wait for those games because it shows that Miami is playing with the lead and they're just killing time and they're matriculating the ball down the field, as they love to say in the broadcast world. So that's the only place. I think the one thing that also hurts that unit is Miami has kind of like learned as the game has progressed. So it's a compliment to coaching in terms of understanding the adjustments that need to be made in terms of your personnel to where instead of running in between the tackles, it's getting outside with like Chris Johnson or Jordan Lyle to make that work. It's just happening too late to really, affect my grade.
Yeah, for me, I gave them an A, so we're flipping grades again this time. I think the running backs have been phenomenal. I have a love-hate relationship with Damian Martinez. We go through this week in and week out and through the text messages, you and I. But I do always say, for his saving grace, he does come through in clutch moments, and he is a clutch running back when we need those anywhere between 3 to 5 yards. He's guaranteed almost. I feel like which I
Yeah.
love, which we did not have in years past. I agree with you. The pass defense has been, or the pass blocking, excuse me, has been exquisite, which is surprising. It's nice to see these guys get in, but I also love the ability to just shuffle through freshmen and experienced players. Like we're getting Lyle in, we're getting everyone, and Chris Johnson. We're just getting all of these players in, and we're making everyone useful, and everyone's playing a part. And when I think I alluded to it last week, we kind of have this like thunder and lightning, like 1-2 punch with Fletcher and with Damian Martinez, which I really like. Because we were supposed to have that a few years ago with these two running backs. I forgot what their name was. One was like Storm, I think, or something like that.
Yeah, there was Storm Johnson. There was
Storm Johnson,
also,
yes.
and then a couple of years after that, also was like Don Chaney
John,
and
yep, who we play.
oh my God, the Rooster, who's at SMU now. I'm trying to remember his name. Like the Rooster is his nickname. I'm trying to remember what his full name is. Either way, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so to me, I thought like again, I didn't think they were A plus. I think just because I thought Damian Martinez would be a little bit more explosive. I still love what he's doing. I wish he would hit the hole a little bit faster, but I get that's part of his game. But I again gave them an A. What about the tight end room? What did you give them, Rudy?
Tight end group, I gave an A, and I think I'm weighting my grade a little bit because this is the first time we've had like a legitimate tight end room in quite a long time. We've had
I
some
agree.
great tight ends come through Miami the last few years, David Njoku and oh my God, I'm already blanking on their two names too, Will Mallory, and there was also the guy from Las Vegas who's in the NFL
Lofton.
now. Sorry.
No. Oh, I'm thinking of the freshman.
No, no, I'm talking about they were on the same team a couple years ago, Manny Diaz years. It was Will Mallory and there was another guy that were both fantastic. We're number 9 for Miami.
I
Either
forgot.
way, we've had some great tight ends, but the problem is that they haven't been a total package. We've had pass
Yeah.
catching tight ends the past couple of years. We haven't had a tight end room or
That can
even a single
block.
tight end that does both the blocking and the receiving. And Elijah
Yeah.
Arroyo has been hurt a couple of years. So now that he's back to full strength, I would argue that he's one of your best weapons because not only on the offensive side in terms of catching and blocking, but also when there's a turnover, he's running the entire length of the field at Tyreek Hill speed to make the game-saving tackle. So your group there is solid. They have a lot of depth because you got guys like Cam McCormick and Riley Williams and Elijah Lofton, the freshman you talked about. So altogether, that's four solid starting tight ends. I think any team would be envious to have two. So that's an A.
Yeah, so I gave them an A plus, and I would give them the award for most improved. I mean, we went from a tight end room that couldn't do anything, the message boards of every Canes fan saying, "Where's our tight ends? Why aren't we utilizing tight ends? Why are we not like creating an offense around the use of tight ends?" To now this year, we've been exploiting tight ends. I think our tight ends have almost become our wide receivers at this point in terms of targets and crucial plays in the red zone. I thought that Arroyo has been probably, besides Cam Ward, been the MVP of this team in terms of, like, had he not gotten that block against the Virginia Tech team, the Virginia Tech interception, that it would have been a pick six. I think his touchdowns have come in key moments. He's just, again, he won. He was the one. He got caught the winning pass
You got the
against
game winning
Cal.
pass.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
he
mean,
didn't
this,
make a guy miss.
I mean, this guy is a stud. I mean, and he's powerful too, because that scoring touchdown, that go ahead scoring touchdown against the Cal game. I mean, he could have easily been stopped in the one, and he
Yep.
powered through that. And so to me, the tight ends have been exquisite. Blocking's been exquisite, making themselves available. Lofton on that key third down, crucial. Like, to me, it's just like it's almost automatic. They're like a Damian Martinez. You know, when you're in that third down, who are we? I mean, I don't want to say this because maybe someone's watching, doubtful. But it's like, if it's third down and short, or even third down maybe in like 7, it's going to go to Damian Martinez or one of our tight ends. That's what I feel like. And then maybe it'll go to Restrepo. But I feel like those are the only 3 options. And I think the tight end room has been the most improved and the most incredible part of our offense, besides our QB room, which we'll get to. What about our wide receivers, Rudy? What are you thinking about our wide receivers?
I gave them an A also because they've had their
Yes.
ups and downs, but I
Yep.
will tell you what, when the game is on the line, they make the catches. We can complain about drops that they had earlier in the games, but hey, every single one of those fourth downs that we had in our our last final couple drives against Cal, those are wide receivers that came through. It was Xavier
Yeah.
Restrepo, it was Isaiah Horton, Jacoby George, for the most part, has kept himself level-headed. He had some transgressions against Cal this past week where he had a silly penalty. Isaiah Horton had a silly penalty that could have killed the drive before too. But again, I can't really complain much because they're pretty much catching everything that's thrown in the radius, at least when the game is on the line. If they're not, 1 or 2 drops is not going to put you down to a B when you have all of the collective matchups that you need. Because one thing I like about this unit too is you have a versatility of terms of what personnel you want to run with the receivers and also just how they vary in size. You got little fast guys like George and Restrepo. You've got big burners like Isaiah Horton.
Yeah.
You've got everything you need. So that's an A.
Yeah, I gave him an A as well. I think the only critique I have for the wide receivers room is they don't get separation as consistently as I would like them to get separation. And then the other thing is just the drop passes. I think we got to hone in on the hands. But again, in key moments, they do catch the ball. They make those key plays when they need to. I just would like to see, the only thing that kept them from getting an A plus in my book was just more consistency with separation and catching. Other than that, I think they're an incredible unit. So I wasn't sure if you wanted to add something.
No.
Finally, I think we don't need to spend too much time on this. We know where this is going. QB room, A plus. There is no room. It is Cam Ward.
Yeah, look, everything goes with him. And as much as there are mistakes, as much as there's things that he does that makes everybody want to scream on the sideline when it happens, this team goes with him. And if you look
Yep.
at the intangibles, the leadership, the preparation, the focus, all that comes with him. Who's
Yeah.
to say that other members on the team don't step up if you don't have a guy like Cam Ward on this team? So I
Yeah.
think just for that alone, that makes him the most valuable player in college football.
Live by the Cam, die by the Cam, guys. That's what it is this season. All right, let's jump onto the other side of the boat, right? Let's go. Let's talk about our defense. What did you give the defense overall, Rudy? And what are some of your thoughts on the defense overall?
My overall grade is a B, and I give them a B because I saw this. I saw social media actually come out with this like a day or two ago from the Miami Hurricanes account where they are like number 1 in total defense in the conference. Okay, that's great, but what my reason that the grade isn't lower is because they do figure things out. the defense has, bent a lot. They've gotten burnt on several big plays, but they also have been playing hurt. They've also been playing with multiple key players out at both the defensive line
That's
and in the
true.
secondary, which happen to be the strongest and at times weakest units. So, in terms of working together and making adjustments, they've done a fantastic job at that. So if they have a bad first half, they usually come out better in the second half, or at least when the game's on the line, they make the plays when they need to. So with that said, they're undefeated. That's a B.
All right. I give them and so it's funny. I'm going to give a little bit more critique. I'm going to be a
Go
little
for
harder
it.
on them, but I'm actually
Go
giving them
for
a
it.
B plus. I'm giving them a B plus because in my opinion, they've been on a precipitous decline defensively, especially when it comes to real competition, specifically conference competition. Our defense ranks currently 52 in points allowed, number 76 in passing yards allowed, and number 29 in rushing yards allowed. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot when you're thinking there's 130 some odd teams, but it does play a big factor in the sense that when you think of teams that have kind of gone to the championship and who have gone to the final, i.e. Michigan last year. Michigan was number 1 in total defense, number 2 in pass defense, and number 6 in rush. So if we want to get to that upper echelon of college football and we want to play with some of those big boys, I think these are things that we need to fix. These are things, certain areas we need to get better at. My biggest worry right now, like I said, is our secondary, which we can get into specifics. But let's talk about the D line really quick. What did you grade the D line at?
I graded the defensive line a B, and I gave them a B only because they are the strongest unit on this defense, but they've also been playing hurt because they've been missing Ruben Bain for the majority of the year. He just made his comeback against Cal. He was hurt in the opening drive against Florida. So you've had players step up like Tyler Barron, who's done a wonderful job. Simeon Barrow was kind of the player of the game for Miami last week in terms of defense, the defensive tackle who transferred in from Michigan State, who had, two very key tackles for loss, including a sack and the comeback against Cal. The thing about them that they don't get an A is because I don't think you've seen their true potential yet. And I think with a full, healthy
Okay.
roster, that's where they have room to grow. So I can't give them an A to begin with because I think they have so much more that they can do. And now that everybody seems to be healthy on that line, Elijah Alston comes back, I believe, after the bye week against Louisville. That's the first time you've had that unit completely 100% since Florida, and I think that's going to pay dividends.
Yeah, I gave the D line an A plus because to me they're the anchor of our defense. I think they're the most consistent, the most stout. They are the first line of defense when it comes to our our defense,
Bro,
and
literally the first line of defense.
and they're mainly the only line of defense because that's the next thing I kind of want to bring up is I've noticed in the last 2 games, once either the running backs or the wide receivers get past that first line and they get into that secondary, it's really a toss up. It's not consistent, especially the tackling, and then the scheming even. I feel like sometimes besides besides our D line, a lot of the rest of the team on that side of the ball is just seems to be out of whack, especially in those explosive play moments. But I gave them an A plus because, like I said, they are the most reliable. They have been. I think we're number 1 on pressures. I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure I have to go find that stat. We have the number 1 ranked defense in terms of pressures, and I think we're number 3 or in the top 5 of sacks. So to me, I gave our D line a plus. What about our linebackers? What did you give our linebackers?
I get a little more strict here. So I went B minus on the linebackers. And I did that primarily because there are some things here where they kind of make the secondary look worse than they actually are.
Yeah, I
There are
can give
some
you that.
plays. Well, I'll say this because when it comes to setting the edge, that's really the linebacker's job. That's not that's not defensive backs. That's not the secondary. It's not even really the defensive line. It depends on what system you're running. But in this case, the bust that Miami's had on defense when it comes to setting the edge is primarily on the linebackers. And it's not always Kiko Maui because Kiko's the middle linebacker, or if they're running 2, he's running, Mike linebacker. He's either eyeing on the quarterback or he's eyeing somebody else. So there is some issues in terms of maintaining and setting the edge that you have guys like Wes Basaint who have been struggling with in terms of being consistent with that play over play. So a lot of these issues are coming from miscommunications and just getting yourselves lost in terms of what your assignments are. Against Florida, that was on Basaint. There was a missed tackle by Maui Noah against Virginia Tech. It's just stuff that when your defensive line is holding and they're also getting penetration, you need a linebacker to either come fill the gap or they have to spy. And
Yeah.
they haven't put that together for 4 quarters in quite a while. They've stepped up when they needed to. Kiko having the game sealing interception against
Yep.
Cal, and also coming up with some key plays like later in the game. But that's where it's a consistency issue.
Yeah, I would agree. I gave them actually an A minus, and for the pure fact that, like you said, key moments, Kiko Mamino comes up. I think in the last two games, he's been a little off, especially with his tackling. But I think that's more from, which we'll talk about, things we need to change, this hero ball mentality that the Canes have kind of like recently picked up in the last two games. But again, that comes from what we were talking about earlier, which I will also mention in a few seconds. Injuries, when you see people injured, when you're thinner on the line, you're going to try and be a hero and play that stud ball and make those things happen. So I gave them an A minus because, like I said, I think Kiko, and even ESPN wrote this, if we're going to be successful moving forward, Kiko's got to play well. It's not just Damian Ward. On the other side, it's Kiko. And Kiko Mawinoa has shown moments of brilliance, and in the last two games has also shown moments of, like, you're better than that. Like, I feel like that's, I watch sometimes, I'm like, oh, you're better than that, bro. Where are you? Why, that was a missed assignment. So I gave them an A minus. What about our DB and safety room? What did you give them?
Secondary also got a B minus, and I gave them the same grade because those two units are so closely knit when it comes to communication that the injuries in the secondary affects how they're playing, and two, how they're communicating on coverage. Because when you lose Damari Brown early in the year,
Yep.
and then you're playing with Jaden Davis, and then against Virginia Tech, Jaden Davis goes down in the second half, and they're playing with Zaquan Patterson, they're playing with Williams, they're playing with different guys.
Who
That's
are
where a lot of
freshmen
that
too, by the way.
right. And well, there's a freshman cornerback that's like OJ Frederic,
Who's
who's
been
been
phenomenal.
fantastic. Yeah.
Phenomenal.
Whoever the star service is, whoever the people behind the grading to make him a 3-star, I'm sorry, find a new job
Yeah. Well, we
because
we we also know UM doesn't necessarily, UM historically has never won with 5 stars. Like, we've
no,
always won with 3, 4 stars, like guys who have had a chip on their shoulder, who have something to prove, and they prove it. And so to me, it's like, I don't even look at the star system really anymore, because sometimes you
no.
get a guy who's a 5 star and he's a bust. But yeah, I think OJ Federic has been a great addition.
Ed Reed's the guy that says to this day, I was considered 2 stars at a Destrehan High School in Louisiana. 2 stars. So anyway, yeah, it doesn't mean anything. It's just that the communication there, they get called out more than they probably should when it comes to those missed assignments in the running game. But what they do happen to struggle with, that's been kind of a problem these past few weeks, just over pursuit and taking bad angles. When they
Yeah,
are they are the
I would
last line
agree.
of defense. As you said, the defensive line is the first line of defense. The secondary is the last line of defense. If you have a DB making a tackle on a running back and you're not in a run blitz, you're in trouble. So that's where they need to have the mentality of minimizing the damage. And also, I think it's just having a little bit better football IQ in terms of when teams are going to be making big shots, sensing momentum shifts, and just being a little bit more fundamentally sound with your eye
Yeah.
discipline and not turning your back to the play too early. Because that's when Miami's been bit. And primarily, that's when, I don't want to single out Mish Powell because he has been kind of the victim of a couple of big plays in Virginia
Yeah.
Tech and at Cal. He's the guy that's communicating everything back there. So as much as he's trying to get everybody in line, he gets a lot of the blame because he's the guy that shoulders the most responsibility. So if anything,
Well,
it's
he's
a
also a
compliment to
senior
him.
too. So I mean,
Yeah, it's a compliment to him in his leadership.
yeah, he's a veteran. And again, it's the hit or miss nature. I gave the DBs and safeties uh, a C minus. And for the pure fact of this is the reason why I give them the C minus. And I know it's harsh.
It's a
I
little
give them
hard.
a C minus because here's the thing. You you were the weakest, you're the weakest link in the team. People knew that going into the game, going into the season, and they've proven it in the last two games. If we were playing a little bit more sound and we were maybe positioned the right way at times and made the right decisions, I don't think we would have as many explosive plays happening against us as we are. That to be said, we have injuries, like you said, Damari Brown. We do on the inverse side of that, we have OJ Federic, who's just balling out as a freshman, and we didn't think that was going to happen, or kind of no. I mean, there were glimpses. I think in the spring game, people were talking about it. There were murmurs, but we didn't know until the season kind of really began. But I just think because they are the weakest link on the team, and they're going to be the spot that a lot of teams are going to target, especially Louisville. I think even Syracuse down the road, they're going to really exploit, and we're going to have to see with this bye week what the secondary does. Do they grow? Do they take a step forward, or do they remain the same? And We just have to really hope that the D line and the linebackers can hold it down and get to the quarterback and disrupt the quarterback from stepping back too much. Overall, I think we both gave the team an A minus. I think in
I give
my
him an A.
opinion, you did. You gave him. I thought you
Yeah, I
told me an
went
A
straight A.
minus. Okay,
But
so
it's
then
okay.
I misput it there.
It's okay.
I said an A minus, mainly just for the pure fact that I think we're playing great. I think we look great. I think we just need to clean up some things, and we need to play to our potential. I think that's the issue we've had in the last two games. We've not played to our potential.
There's one thing that kept me from giving the secondary like a C, in the range of C, that kept me at the B minus, and it's something that it's complementary, because some of their opportunities have been because of pass pressure generated by the defensive line and the linebackers, but also because they do, when they're playing well, they do have their moments of brilliance. They're number 2 in the country in interceptions. They're
That's
just
true.
behind Cal. So Cal has like 11 after the pick six that Cam threw last week, but Miami got number 10 to seal the game. Granted, that was Kiko. That wasn't the secondary doing it. But
Exactly.
as a collective unit, when you look at the secondary, they're the ones that have the lion's share of the interceptions. I think like 9 of the 10 are by defensive backs. Some are in garbage time, yes. Like you look at Miles Muyan, got a great one against I
I
think
love
he
his
had
name,
his
Moo
against
Young.
Ball State, but that's something that you can't coach ball hawking. And it's something that when they're clicking, they're very effective. So it's one of those where they have a very high ceiling and they have a pretty low basement as right now. So it's just a little bit of consistency.
And to sandwich technique this, I don't want to poo-poo the defense because I love the defense. Shout out to my friend German who sent me this kind of stat, which I think is great. For second, the defense is making massive second half adjustments. So just to give you an idea, in the first half against the USF, we were allowing 15 points. In the second half of the US game, 0 points. In the first half of the Virginia Tech game, we were allowing 24 points. In the second half of the UF game, 10 points. In the first
Mhm.
half of the Cal game, we allowed 21 points. In the second half of the Cal game, 17 points. So we are making the adjustments we need to make in halftime, which is great. So I give them that. I just would like to see us playing to our full potential. I would love to see the secondary take a step up and level up a bit. But enough of the grading. Let's talk about what things need to be corrected in this bye week as we head into Louisville. What are some of the things that you think need to be corrected?
You want me to start offense or defense?
It doesn't matter, just all around. I kept this more all around, whatever you felt like needed to be corrected the
Well,
most.
there is one collective thing across both units, and it's just having a little bit more poise. And by having more poise and not letting the game kind of like get away from you, I think solves problems on both the offensive and defensive sides of the ball. I think where Miami has struggled offensively this season, it's when they feel like they're having to push and they're having to force things.
Yeah,
When they just take what the defense gives them, and that's primarily advice for Cam Ward. We know we love your magic, and there are times where that magic needs to shine, but you don't need to give us 4 quarters of magic. You could play 2.5 quarters of boring football and just take what the defense gives you. And when you need to, if it's a third down and long, or if you see a hole and need to go do something, like there's times where you need to tap into Cam Ward mode and make that happen. It doesn't need to be every single down. And with that said, that means if you select your check downs, I mean, people were screaming in that Cal game of Martinez is open, Fletcher is open, just check it down, because he
yeah,
made those plays against Florida earlier in the year, and Fletcher makes a guy miss. And what seems like is a routine 3 yard play, maybe you get a yard of, 1 yard net gain. He breaks for 20 and almost gets a touchdown. So it's putting the ball in your playmaker's hands. Yes, you're the, number one playmaker yourself, but you don't have to do it on your own every single time. And that
that's
same
true.
theme defensively is, like you mentioned, it's the hero ball. It's just knowing your assignment and sticking to your assignment in terms of trusting your teammate to be there. So you're not the guy who's going to be making the tackle at the point of attack on the edge, but you have to set the edge. You have
That's
to drive that runner in to field,
field.
like
Yep,
back in field and not to the boundary, so that your linebacker can make that tackle. You have to
exactly.
trust Kiko to make that tackle or West Passaic to make that tackle. That makes your life a hell of a lot easier.
Yeah. For me, it's the same stuff. Need to eliminate hero ball, stay disciplined, play sound football. I always say this: if I was an offensive coordinator, I would have some sort of like my strategy would always be 4 yards of play. You get 4 yards of play, no matter what it is, your first downs, touchdowns eventually. You know what I mean? So you don't have to play hero ball. You can play that sound football. And then, when you feel like you've got it up by 2 points, then you can go for some more explosive plays to put it in the bag. Another thing I think it's not necessarily something that needs to be corrected, but something we really should focus on is getting healthy. I think a lot of key players have been playing banged up, and necessary players have been out and need to return. We have 5 DBs on our injury list. Other key players that have been injured: Jalen Rivers, Damari Brown. Hopefully, we can get Jalen Rivers back this week. Well, not this week, but next week against Louisville.
Get him
Having
back
Damar,
practicing this week. I'll take
uh,
that.
yeah, I mean, so I think to me, like, we have to be we have to start. I mean, just the players themselves, like, you got to start take care of yourself the best you can. Again, I'm not saying that they're not, but I wish we were a little bit more healthy. But again, we're getting into October. When we get into November, there's probably going to be even more banged up players. So I get it's part of the game, but I think if we can stay healthy, we're unstoppable. Another thing is, unless we fix our secondary and come up with a scheme or solution like we did last year with our D line. I think last year we started off with a 4-3, then we went to a 3-3-5 towards the end of the year when we had all those injuries. I think that's something we really need to focus on this year, but with our secondary. Uh, Maybe we need to change the scheme up. Maybe that would help. I'm not sure. I have no idea. I don't get paid the big bucks, so I don't know. But we keep getting torched on these explosive plays. So to me, I think there just needs to be a scheme fix in terms of the secondary. And then lastly, I think we need to get a bigger push on the O line. I think that O line needs to flex. I think they need to get their confidence back. Like I said, if we can get Jalen Rivers back, maybe get a unit that is more cohesive and can get that push like we were seeing against UF. And again, the cupcake teams, you're expecting that, but I think a team like UF, that the SEC line kind of showed that, like, we have the potential. We can push, and people have even said, we have an SEC line, in
And they
the
were
ACC.
dominating the line of scrimmage against Cal. Like, it's one of those things where if the game didn't get so off the rails with the defensive missed assignments and the missed tackling, Miami probably runs that ball 20, 30 more carries, and they cruise to an easy win, because it's something that you saw opening series, the second series, what they wouldn't when they didn't even need it because it was 1st and 10. They're getting 5, 6 yards on first down. So they were doing really well. It's just a matter of how the rest of the game is playing out so they can play complementary football. And
Yeah,
that's the biggest thing, because Miami, the fact that they're winning by not playing complementary football, if anything, they're playing the opposite of complementary football. It's almost as if, like, the one thing about this team is that they're all together. They all play for each other. So it's not like the struggles of years ago where it's like the offensive
yeah.
goes out there and says, middle finger to the defense. We don't care. We're going to be 3 and out so fast in 20 seconds. Good luck. Go stop them. Go stop them, buddies. Go ahead.
Go
And then
back
the
to
defense
work.
goes out there and says, oh, can you move the ball? There's
Yeah.
so much tension between units where one isn't performing and it's putting unnecessary strain on the other. In this case, you don't have that, but if they can just put it together cohesively for 4 quarters, it's going to look a lot like when they played Florida. They're going to be blowing people out.
Yeah. So what's your outlook for the remainder of the season? How do you see the next 6 games going?
Oh my God, the glass is half full. The rosy colored glasses are still on. Like, the way I'm watching this season play out, you can't help but feel. I don't know if you're just if I'm being slowly fooled here, because I've seen two of the worst games that this team has played where they always lose in the past. It's just a fact of life. When you watch Miami usually play, they did against Virginia Tech and Cal, they lose. And
Yeah.
sometimes they don't keep it close. Sometimes they get blown out in play like that. I don't see that happening again. I said that last week. One of these weeks we're going to be right, and they're going to put it together. Louisville,
Oh,
I'm interested to see how they respond, because losing 2 in a row, and well, I don't think it was 2 in a row, but they lost two. Losing Notre Dame and then losing SMU, two different styles of teams. I was honestly a little surprised to see them lose to SMU the way that they did, because
yeah, me too.
that's a small finesse kind of team. They're not exactly very physical. It shows that, look, Miami has to take them has to take them seriously. They can't take them lightly, but they should out physical Louisville. They should win that game without having a whole lot of drama. But this is why college football is there.
Y-
And every single game after that, Miami should have smooth sailing up until the ACC championship game.
Yeah, I mean, Louisville's got a randomly undefeated Virginia team coming in this week, which should be very interesting. I don't see them losing, but good God, if they lose to an undefeated Virginia team, and then we have to play a Louisville team that's literally on a 3-game skid, like, that's bad news bears for us.
Yeah.
I know you took the glass half full. I sadly am going to take the glass half empty. We are getting this
Yeah.
the spread in the fourth quarter, and going into the second half of the game. It's widening, and it's making my eyes bulge. I just We've been on a precipitous decline defensively. And Louisville will not only be a test, but will gauge to see where we're at. Are we going to come out of the bye week? I think we're 2-8 or 2-5 in the last 7 or 8, like 10 years since 2015 coming out of the bye week. So we do not have a winning record coming out of the bye week. We'll be playing a Louisville team that will no doubt, no doubt be playing their Super Bowl, just like Cal did with us. I mean, I think we're going to be everyone's Super Bowl team, to be honest with you, moving forward.
Which has
And
been the case for Miami, even when they were bad. We're always Miami's always been every team's Super Bowl. So when they
yeah,
say we beat Miami, they don't care what the year is. They just know, oh, people know that brand. If we beat them, it doesn't matter if they've won 4 games, 5 games in the season.
yeah. So I think we're gonna lose one more game. I don't know when it's gonna be, but we're on the road again, and it's a team that can create a lot of explosive plays, specifically through the air. How we come out of the bye week again, it's going to tell us everything we need to know. It's like, are we going to correct the mistakes either partially or wholly, or are we going to be keep doing more of the same and just anticipating that one loss? I just Louisville's going to tell us everything. I think Louisville,
Yeah,
how we come out of it, whether we come out flat, whether we come out explosive. I mean, ideally, I would love to see. I mean, I don't even care if the offense even takes a step back. Like, we don't need to score 50 points a game. I'm cool with that. Like, or even 45 points a game. If we can score a cool 30 points a game and then not allow more than 14 to like maybe 21 points against a really good team, that would be great. And that puts us at undefeated. But I mean, we're just gonna have to wait and see.
yeah. I mean, the one thing that I'm really interested to see with Louisville, I hope Miami's been practicing in the IPF this entire time, because I think there's something that it may sound a little ridiculous, but I'll tell you, the transition between natural grass to artificial turf is kind of a big deal in terms of your equipment and how your
Yeah,
team is prepared, and also even how you have to work on your movement and your technique.
of
It's a little
course.
different depending on the two surfaces. And I've seen it where Miami, I was witnessed it firsthand. My Sebastian the Ibis days, I still have PTSD from watching Russell Wilson make every single one of our defensive linemen look like it's like the Benny Hill video where there's
Yeah.
sliding all over the place. Like if P Diddy had a bunch of lube all over the field and Raleigh, because it was so muddy and it was so wet. Our guys had the wrong spikes. And the problem with that is, depending on how the game is being played and what the pace is, you can't quickly have, let's take 22 sets of shoes and go change everybody's cleats out. They're
No,
taped shut,
yeah.
they're taped over. If you make a mistake like that and it's, the first half, you won't have until halftime to fix that. And then in
Yep.
the second half, if you have it wrong there, now you have to play the rest of the game that way. So I think there's something to be said for Miami going out their first artificial turf game of the year up at Cal and having to figure out the surface a little bit. And now Louisville playing that way. This is a good test because there's a few other games down Miami's calendar where you're going to be going on to turf as well. You're going to be doing it at Georgia Tech, which is honestly kind of a disservice to Georgia Tech because they used to have one of the prettiest fields in college football in terms of how it was maintained and how fast of a track it was in terms of having very, very, very short field turf grass. And then you go Syracuse to close the year, also dome and artificial turf. So great to have the IPF and great to have that extra time to prepare.
Well, we'll have the test next week and we will see what our Canes do playing Louisville next Saturday at noon. But now back to other college football. We had some chaos in the SEC this past week. Bama goes down to Vandy 40-35. Vandy went
Understatement of the year. We have a little
right.
bit of chaos. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you talk about high highs and low lows. Vandy went wire to wire leading Bama. I mean, just to give you an idea for some of our casuals out there, up until this game, Vandy was 0-60 versus top 5 teams. And this is the first time that Vandy has beat Alabama since 1984. In my lifetime, as long as I've been on this earth, I have never
Both of us.
seen that. And it's the first time their first time beating a number one team. I think Bama has given up 81 points in the last 2 games, which is ridiculous. I mean, under
Yeah.
Saban, I think under Saban's tenure, he only allowed 13 points total for Vanderbilt to score, and Vanderbilt put up 40. I think they put up like 21 by halftime.
Yeah.
So which is wild.
They look physical too. The thing about the big stat for me in that game, as much as I was trying to click in and watch as much as I could going back and forth with it, but what really, shocked me was Vandy held the ball for like 2 minutes and 30 seconds to close out that game.
Yeah.
They played ball control. They played physical. They took their shots down the field when they had it. Cause you were mentioning that like dramatic fourth down play where they just, went over the top of the defense.
Yep.
Yeah, Bama's given up a lot of points last 2 weeks. It's one thing to do it to then #1 Georgia in a thriller at home. It's another thing to do it on the road at Vandy. And I would argue that that wasn't even really a true road game. If you look at the Bama side of the field, that was
70%.
all crimson.
Yeah, no, 70%. They said 70% of the people in the stadium were representing Alabama. That's
Yeah.
wild.
You had a home game on the road and you lose that. And look, as much as people want to criticize Miami for keeping it close against Virginia Tech and Cal, you don't lose to Vandy.
No.
Never. You just don't do that.
To me, it's completely inexcusable. And to lose in the fashion they lost. I mean, I think Vandy, like Arkansas, which we'll talk about in a few minutes,
Yeah.
they played a very unconventional game. We were talking about, you mentioned it, the 4th and 1 with 3 minutes left in the third quarter. He throws that bomb touchdown where he's not only, this is the best part about that play, he is getting laid into as he launches it, and then the receiver has to completely stretch out to catch that play. And had he not stretched out and jumped to catch the ball, he would never have caught it. And Bama would have gotten the ball back and could possibly have done their Bama thing and swung the momentum back in their favor and maybe won the game. But I mean, to me, I think it's a testament to Vandy for controlling the game, controlling the pace of the game. Diego Pavia, hero ball, loved it. It was
Yeah.
incredible to watch. He's a legend. He'll never have to pay for a drink in Nashville ever again. That guy is a
It's true.
stud. Did you see his brothers during the game?
Yeah.
Dude, his brothers were lit. They were just like, I was like, yo, if you aren't cheering for me like Diego Pavia's brothers are, I don't want you. You ain't in my squad, because those guys had pins. They were saucy
The
during
sideline
that game.
reporter was talking about it too. He said that, they would send him film every single week and say, "Oh, you need to exploit this against this team and exploit that." I think one of his brothers is a botanist, like randomly enough. So it's just super cool to see like how this whole world kind of collided, and that his one, it's great to see family supporting family, but two, the kid's a character. And as much as they're giving, let's touch on this real quick, because Diego Pavia got a little bit of criticism for, dropping some F bombs on TV. Cam
Uh,
Ward got some criticism for
yeah,
dropping some profanity on TV also.
yeah.
Hey, they're kids, man, and I get it. Like they're trying to elevate themselves to a different level, but if you're going to throw a mic and a headset on them immediately after the game is over, they haven't even seen
Exactly.
like half their teammates yet. This is stuff that happens, and as much as people criticize it, I think this is what networks want. I think
Hey,
we've seen this
yeah,
like desensitization of profanity on television now. One, Pat McAfee having his own, brand and doing it. They're not the same because people expect that when you're watching it, but I
right.
don't think it's quite as shocking as it used to be anymore.
No, and I think that again, this is always my gripe with the public at large is you have to understand locker room culture and you have to understand the sport. Like Mario Cristobal mentioned it last week, specifically with the Basainth quote unquote targeting hit, where he's like, "We're playing a violent sport for 60 minutes. Like things are gonna get out of hand," and that's what it is. Like we're not playing like touch football. We're not playing 7-on-7. Like this is 2 to 300 pound men throwing their bodies as hard as they can at each other to win a game. And so when you have that, I mean, the testosterone is going to be through the roof, and
Of course.
especially in a late game where you have Cam Ward coming back by 20 something points, you have Diego Pavia doing something that hasn't been done in 40 years. Like, come on, bro, like get over
Yeah.
yourself. Like we are well past that. But enough of the sideline stuff. What do you think this says about Alabama, Rudy?
Well, it says a couple things. I think the Alabama had done a good job rehabilitating. Wow. Okay. Give me a little drink of water here in a second when you start talking, but they rehabbed their image a little bit because I think there was this perceived drop off when Nick Saban retires and Kalen DeBoer comes in. They're like, oh well, Nick saw the handwriting on the wall. He wanted to get out of there because Georgia surpassed them, and Georgia beating Bama at home did something to change that image, but the rat poison conversation, coaches always are learning on the job. Doesn't matter if they've been coaching for 40 years, been coaching for 20 years, and Kalen DeBoer has been around a lot of places. Not a young up and comer. He's been around the block. This is just another adventure of teaching your team that on any given day, on any given Saturday or Friday or, Mac Wednesday,
Mac
hey,
Wednesday.
FIU played on a Tuesday this week. You could get beat if you don't bring your best game. And that's what
Yeah.
this proves. I don't think it's anything long term for Bama. Is there blood in the water? I mean, I'd say there's been blood in the water for, a year now. in terms of teams catching up to Bama and perhaps surpassing them in recruiting. It just means you have to bring your game. You can't just say we're Bama and we beat everybody, as much as their fans want to believe that.
That is very true. Do you think Bama's going to lose another game? Because they still have Tennessee on the schedule, who
Uh, I don't know. I mean, the way I know we're going to talk about the Tennessee game too with Arkansas. I saw some stuff in that game that really concerns me about Tennessee. I think you looked at
I
Miami and
agree.
Tennessee, you kind of compared them because there were these two completely explosive offenses. Some people were even saying that Tennessee had a better offense because they're putting up
Yeah.
like 70 something points against New Jersey School for the Blind. But you watch some of these, that last drive,
Oh
you
man.
have to have the poise to know I have to get this ball out of my hand. I have to throw it
Yeah.
downfield. You can't keep scrambling and think you're going to go 50 yards, running on a miraculous play. So seeing that, and also just the physical play that Arkansas had. Arkansas is a team in the SEC that says, you know, uh, they're usually the team that everyone thinks for maybe 2 weeks, oh, are they going to be good this year? And they lose to like Arkansas State or something like that. And all of a sudden, okay, just kidding about Arkansas. They showed up. And
They
I
did.
think it looks better for Bama's schedule to know that Tennessee's beatable. And if they play a more physical style of game and not have to worry about airing it out for 50, 60 times, they probably keep that game close. And I honestly expected Tennessee to handle Oklahoma better a couple of weeks ago. I think Oklahoma might have showed that if you could play physical against Tennessee, you can hang in there.
Yeah, it seems like in this Tennessee Arkansas game that, Arkansas beat Tennessee 19-14. We're starting to see, to Tennessee be human. They can bleed. I think Tennessee's offense is continuing to struggle this week as it took until the third quarter to score. Malachi Singleton, the backup, putting the team on his back and running it in for that Arkansas touchdown was incredible. To me, it was just like, I wonder, is it because Arkansas is a really weird team? Arkansas,
Always
like,
is.
they just they lose to teams they shouldn't lose to, and they beat teams they shouldn't beat. And this was a prime example of that. And we kind of maybe should have saw the writing on the wall last week when they played Texas A&M to the wire, who, by the way, I think is a really good team, surprisingly, with their first year head coach Mike Elko. But Arkansas remained steadfast and resilient, scoring an 11-yard run with 1 minute and 17 seconds left in the game. Like, to me, if you're playing I think they were number 4, Tennessee at the time, the
Yeah.
number 4 team in the country, you're
You're
expected to lose. You're holding them to 19 points, which is unheard of. For, like you were talking about, the team that's putting up 72 points on the School of the Blind. I think it's hero moment. And it's the first top 5 win for Arkansas since 1999, which, fun fact, was the Vols, who were number 3 at the time.
Mhm.
Very scary, like circumstances going on there. Um, I think, though, for Tennessee moving forward, as much as they want to rely on Nico Imaliava, I think Dylan Sampson, their running back, is the key to their success. He was 22 for 138 against Arkansas and had two and scored their only 2 touchdowns. So, to me, I think Tennessee has to go back in. They have to lick their wounds because they're playing a Florida team this week that is kind of getting their confidence back after beating UCF. Um, We'll talk about the other team that I had alluded to earlier. Speaking of Texas A&M, Mizzou got the doors blown off by Texas A&M.
Yeah.
I mean, this was a bloodbath, 41-10, and I mean, those 10 points they shouldn't even exist because at one point Mizzou was losing 34-0, I think, in the third
Yeah.
quarter. I
It was
mean, it
garbage
was.
time.
Yeah, they're paper tigers, and it's not the same offense from last year. I think I even alluded to this when we were going over the AP rankings the first couple of weeks. I was like, Mizzou is not good. They're not a good team. And I don't mean not good like they're the bottom of the barrel, but they're a tier 2, tier 3 SEC team. They're not going to be competing with the likes of Alabama or Georgia or Texas. You know what I mean? I wouldn't, honestly, I wouldn't even put them on. I would put them on a tier 3 because I don't even think they can compete with an Ole Miss or an LSU. To be honest with you, I don't think Mizzou is that good. I think it's really kind of impressive to see Texas A&M undefeated since their opening loss to Notre Dame and kind of get their stride going. And what else was really impressive to me is they brought Connor Wegman back, who's been battling a shoulder injury all season, and I think he gives them a promising future. And I think the backup, I forgot what his name is, the redshirt freshman kid, I can't remember. But to me, it's just weird how both Texas teams have 2 really good quarterbacks. Like, what
Yeah.
is up with that? Like,
I mean, Texas is quarter. It's one of those 3 states you go for quarterbacks, or 2 states you go for quarterbacks. It's usually, at least back in the day, it was California and Texas were your 2 big quarterback markets. So it makes sense that they're stacked. And hey, look, even Texas was even further stacked because Duke starting quarterback was the third stringer over at Texas a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
So they do have depth, and it's something that I think if you ask most people who follow football, hey, Mizzou's going into Aggieland, what's going to happen? I think Mizzou had a good run. Congrats. You did well for the first 5 games of the year. It's time to pay the piper, because that was a trap game the whole time.
Yeah, I think so
They
too.
struggled at home to beat some, lesser
Vandy. They
competition.
struggle
Yeah,
with
well,
Vandy.
yeah.
But I
Hey,
mean,
look,
again, yeah, Vandy beat Alabama, so it's not a strong argument. But
Vandy's a
still,
physical team.
before
They beat
before
Virginia
this
Tech.
past before this past weekend, yeah, I mean, yeesh,
Yeah. It's one of those things
yeesh.
where it's one to struggle with Vandy. It's another thing to lose to Vandy. Like, yeah, that's for me, that's you could see that Mizzou just wasn't for real, like you mentioned. They weren't the top of the conference. They were running a great system, but they ran into a buzzsaw in terms of Texas A&M, and they're starting to get their rhythm.
Yeah. So who is your favorite to win the SEC? I mean, Texas is the only unbeaten left. Who do you have winning the SEC?
I want to see where the rest of the schedules go, because I think Oklahoma plays Texas closer than some people might think this week.
We're gonna get
Red
into
River
that in our
rivalry.
preview. Yeah,
Right. So in terms of being undefeated, like, yeah, that's a conference game now, as
it
crazy as
is.
that is.
Well, it's always
So
been, but it's for the SEC.
yeah,
Because it's always it always I always felt like the Red River Shootout always determined the Big 12 winner. I mean, in
yeah,
those random one-off, two-off years where you had like a TCU win or a Baylor win, 90% of the time it was either Texas or Oklahoma, and
right.
that
And
game
and that
decided.
and even though one of those two teams wouldn't win, that game would knock one of them out, which opened the door for like a Texas, like a
Exactly.
TCU or an Oklahoma State or something like that to do it. So in this
100%.
case, like, it's the first year where there isn't an East and West SEC, so it's the two best records that face off again. I honestly, I wouldn't be surprised to see Bama, find a way to pull it out. As much as I hate to say that, I know it's like look, my face says it all. I don't like it, but hey, I'm not going to doubt them. One loss Bama usually gets angry and runs the table at that point to getting into the playoffs. So I'll just go there.
Yeah, so do you think so would you say Bama would be the team to sneak back in, or who do you think the team that could be out of it? Cuz Georgia lost last week also, don't forget, to Bama. And they have a
Yeah.
loss on their record as well. So do you think there's a team that could sneak in that's not Bama or Texas?
I mean, I think it's a 3 horse race, to be honest with you, in terms of where they finish out at the end of the year in conference. It's going to be some permutation or combination of Texas versus Bama versus Georgia,
Yeah,
however those three play out. But I don't think that anybody else sneaks back in. Like, LSU is not where they need to be, and they have a great game this weekend coming up. Couple teams can play spoiler in terms of knocking one of those three out. I mean, hey, look, Bama has to go
absolutely.
to South Carolina. I think they host South Carolina this weekend. That's no
Yes.
cakewalk. That's a game that they have to be up for, because they already lost to one former SEC East
Yeah.
team, which was the weaker of the two divisions. So don't never say never. And hey, South Carolina gave LSU problems. So let's see where that goes. I mean, I think
And
Bama
South
comes out
Carolina's just
angry.
coming off a loss to Ole Miss too, a beatdown. So
Yeah,
they're hungry for a win. So we're,
because
we're
Ole
gonna have
Miss
to
was
see.
angry from their loss to Kentucky. Yeah,
And that's what I'm saying. These teams, man, they don't take it lightly, because they know this year that, like, a loss has always been a death sentence. But in the SEC, this is my next question I want to ask you is, how many teams do you think make it into the playoff? Because you can lose a game and still make it in, but with, like you were saying, with the way that the conference is conference scheduling is playing out, we may be looking at SEC teams getting into the playoff with two losses.
yeah.
I think if Texas stays undefeated, they're obviously going. I mean, and obviously by nature they would be the SEC champions. But I think if they can remain unbeaten, I think Texas takes it all. But how many other teams do you think could make it in from the ACC to the playoffs? I mean, the SEC to the playoffs.
I'm going to use the same. I think this is going to be my SEC face from now on. The one that I was disgusted with using for Bama. I
Uh,
think this is just be my SEC
uh,
face, because the way I look at it, like, could a 2 loss team get in? Possibly. I look at it as, if there's two 1 loss SEC teams playing each other for the conference championship, then yeah, there's going to be a 2 loss team that gets in. But I think they absolutely get at least one at large, because if you look at the larger landscape of college football, yeah, we can argue as Miami fans that the ACC is very top heavy, and we're probably only going to get the conference champion in. You're not going to get an at large. You're not going to get many at-large Big
I
Ten teams in either this year. I think you're only going to get one Big Ten champion, because we'll see how it plays out with this coming
I
week
mean,
and the
we're going to
week
talk about the
after.
Big
But
Ten in a minute,
right,
but
I just don't see, like, of all the conferences, like, yeah, the SEC, they're on name alone, they're going to have at least two teams in, and I don't really see another conference getting more than one team in of the Power Four, because they haven't looked that consistent from top to bottom.
well,
Every so one of these leagues have one or two teams that are strong.
yeah, well, here's the thing. If the SEC gets more than two teams in, that means just by nature, just by the way things go, and this is talking as if Texas wins out, right? You'll have an
Yeah,
undefeated Texas team. You'll have a one-loss Georgia or Alabama, or then you'll have a two-loss Georgia or Alabama. So you'll have an
yeah.
undefeated, a one-loss, and a two-loss, potentially another two-loss, maybe three-loss team. Who knows? I think that's because here's the thing. Let's do the math really quick, and in a few weeks, I think you and I should put together our own brackets week to week.
Yeah.
But you have the four conference champions. So that's 4 out of the 12 spots that we've got, right? So that leaves 8 more spots. So you figure between the Big 10 and the SEC, they're going to each take an additional 2 because whoever lost the conference. So that's 6 spots. Then you have the group of 5, which now eliminates it to 5 spots. ACC 4 spots. So we have 4 spots left to give between all three major conference. Oh, and the Big 12 is only going to send one team. I mean, that's where we're going to get into next too,
Yeah.
after the Big 10. But it's just going to be very interesting to see that we could potentially have 2-loss SEC teams in the playoffs. That's wild to me. Again, that's my favorite word this year. Wild.
It
Because
is.
it to me, if you would have gone to me in the early 2000s during the BCS era and been like, there's going to be 2 teams playing for the BCS championship to have 2 losses, I would have been like, what?
Fire the
Heresy.
computers. Yeah.
Heresy. But enough about the SEC. We got to talk about the Big Ten matchups that are going down this week, and some of the ones that went down this past week. Let's first look back at this past week's 6 matchups. USC going down somehow with a 92% probability. In the fourth quarter, USC still managed to lose to Minnesota. You called it, Rudy. You called it, Rudy. I didn't believe it. I didn't think so. I didn't think Minnesota had the talent, to be honest with you. I thought USC would be buttoned up, especially getting ready for Penn State this week. It was just wild to me.
Yeah.
It's just like USC came out of the gate, which they have the past couple of weeks, sluggishly. I mean, they've done it in the last 2 games. It's just more of the same, where we're just seeing USC fall flat. USC's offense wasn't terrible. They outgained the Golden Gophers technically 373 to 362, but missed field goals paired with costly penalties and turnovers played a key factor in them losing to Minnesota. I also want to credit Minnesota's run game that averaged nearly 5 yards a carry and scored 3 touchdowns. I mean, that's beast. Like, they pulled a Michigan on USC. Like USC, which again, like, I get it. USC's D line, which we'll talk about in the preview for Penn State, is just abysmal right now. I mean, they can't stop a nosebleed if they wanted to. But obviously you called it, Rudy. What made you want to call it? I mean, we kind of talked about it briefly last week, but what were some of the things that maybe came to fruition that you saw this past week?
Combination of things. One of them is just the travel aspect. Anytime you have a West Coast team that has to go to almost across the country, it's like midway through. You're going halfway across the country, place where you're not used to playing in. It has something to do with the environment. It's not stadium intangibles. It's just physical travel and conditions that you're dealing in. It's
Yeah.
colder than it is in Southern California. To play a game like
But they
that
had a warm
fairly
game.
early on.
The weather, just like in Berkeley, the weather was actually was better than I thought it was going to be. It was a lot warmer.
Yes, but there's this factor that you're going to, like, a foreign place that you've never really traditionally traveled to deal with, because they've gone to the Pacific Northwest. They've played in fog. They played in all sorts of conditions, but to go out there is a little different. And to be honest with you, USC is starting to rear its head now, because they look great right out the gate. We all thought they, after the LSU game, they did really, really well. Their offense was ticking. They were moving, but defense was always the issue with Lincoln Riley. And it's something that they thought they had fixed this year. But frankly, it's just not all together for 4 quarters. kind of like Miami, but at the same time, they don't make the adjustments and they don't fix their defense. It's something that's been kind of a knock on Lincoln Riley since he was at Oklahoma. So I kind of expect that to happen because you're running a ball control style of offense with Minnesota, and all those Big Ten teams are playing similar styles of football that doesn't really match up well with USC these past couple of years. So they have to really get back to work. They have to build their trenches. I don't think they're there yet. Lincoln Riley he had success quickly because he went into the portal, but as we've learned with Florida State, you can't build an entire roster. You could do it for a year, but you have to start recruiting your own guys and building your program. He's starting to come around philosophically to playing more defensive and playing more ball control, but it has to continue evolving.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Um, and then to the other match in the Big 12 that was kind of a surprise, but I guess Vegas kind of knew. Michigan going down to Washington. It was the rematch that really wasn't a rematch. The old saying, if you have more than one quarterback, you have none. And I think Michigan is understanding that right now. Michigan going to their third QB, Jack Tuttle, who had a little bit more success than Orgy, moving the ball down the field. Sadly, he committed two costly turnovers with 10 minutes left in the game. Washington was able to put it away with a field goal that put them up by 10 with just a minute left. I think Michigan plays Illinois this week, who's coming off a loss to Penn State, so they'll be ready and up and ready to play them. Washington plays a mediocre Iowa team who is also coming off a loss to Ohio State. Did you see this? Vegas clearly saw it, but did you see this happening with Washington and Michigan, Rudy?
So first thing, the rematch that wasn't for another reason as well, because if you look at all of the factors that were in that playoff game last year, none of them are there anymore.
That's
This
true.
wasn't Michael Penix Jr. versus JJ McCarthy. It's not, Jim Harbaugh against Kalen DeBoer. They're all gone.
Yeah.
So totally new group of people. Did I see it coming? It's a similar. I don't think I called this one. I don't think we really talked about this one that much. I knew it would be an interesting matchup. It was one of those. I was like, hey, I want to see this primarily for the opposite reason of what USC did, because USC had to go to the Midwest. This is a Midwest team going out west
West,
and playing
right.
out there, similar like what Miami having to play Cal, except earlier in the day. It's interesting to see how that style of ball just didn't really work out. And hey, I don't. Michigan is one of those teams this year where I don't think anybody was high on because of all the turnover that's
No.
happened there. Then also
Yeah.
that cloud of what was happening last year with the team. It's just not a recipe for success. So it doesn't surprise me that it happened. What will surprise me, though, is this week, as you mentioned, Washington's going over to Iowa. This is the same style of game, but now Washington's the road team. So to me, that's a trap game.
Yeah, I think the game was I didn't know. I really thought Michigan was going to pull it out just for the pure fact that their ground and pound game has been so successful for them this season. I think the fact that they've realized that they can't move the ball with their first two quarterbacks, Orgy coming out and starting the game and them having to go to Jack Tuttle. Someone was mentioning, I forgot which pundit it was, but they were mentioning they think that Jack Tuttle was kind of always the plan, but because he was hurt in preseason and going into the first 5 games that he wasn't, they couldn't rely on that. So they've been playing this style of football until he could get back. So we'll really have to see the second half of the season how Michigan responds and how Jack will play out for their team. But speaking of Iowa, they got the doors blown off them by Ohio State. My
Yeah.
God, which I mean, the first half I was like, oh, this is status quo, a 0-7, like, or 7-0 game. Ohio State's up. I'm like, this is what I kind of expect. It's a battle in the trenches. But is OSU is Ohio State legit, Rudy?
I'm going to use the SEC face again. One, because you know how we both feel about Ohio State, but I don't, the thing about Ohio State and the Big Ten overall is it's extremely top heavy, and it's more top heavy than I think it's been in a long time. So are they legit? We'll find out this weekend when they go into Autzen Stadium and go play Oregon, because if everyone remembers, Mario's biggest win was going into the Horseshoe and taking them out a couple years
Yep.
ago. So
Yep.
I think there's a big test there. Uh, with some of these teams from out west now in the Big Ten, like the in terms of Ohio State, this is probably their biggest test, because I obviously playing Michigan at the end of the year, or as they want to call them, that team up north.
Yeah.
Um,
They're playing a real team up north this week.
that's a slobber knocker for them every
Yeah.
single year,
Yeah.
regardless of whether Michigan has one loss, two losses. This will be their biggest test. So, are they for real? Let's see what they do against Dan Lanning and Oregon. Which, granted, Oregon hasn't looked the best this year either, but when they need to put it together, they figured it out. So, I like Oregon in this matchup only because they're home, and people underrate Autzen, man. for the longest time when, before Chip Kelly was there, even though they ran more of like a softer style of offense before Cristobal came in terms of running just like speed and tempo and trying to get 80 plays a game, Autzen, for its capacity, has been rated as one of the loudest stadiums in college football year in and year out, regardless of how many people are in there. You can
Yeah.
talk about Death Valley and LSU. I'll argue and say that when Miami's got a full house, there's no place that's louder than that. In
Listen,
2017, Notre
I,
Dame proved
I
it.
I attribute this. This is like my traffic argument I gave with my wife. Because fun
Yeah,
fact for anyone who doesn't know, my dream is to live in LA. Not anymore because it's a shit show there right now.
I want to be
But
there too.
yeah, but
So
I
yeah,
would love to live in LA. But my wife always says there's so much traffic in LA. There's so much traffic, and I'm like, there's a lot of traffic in Miami, and not moving is not moving. Whether you're not moving in 4 lanes of traffic or 5 lanes of traffic, like it's not moving. And the same is true with these stadiums. Like the big house separated because just the mechanics of it. But I think if you can get into an enclosure of some sort where you can keep the sound in, the Hard Rock, if it's packed, gets just as loud as the Swamp, just as loud as Autzen. All these places, it's just a matter of packing those stadiums. So home field advantage is never a thing. But like back to OSU and specifically, you know, I wasn't sure about OSU, and I still am not with Iowa. I think the Iowa game was a great litmus test, but I don't think it was the test. We're going to get into it later on with our weekly predictions. The Oregon game, and I think it's going to show us a lot of who Ohio State is. But I think one of the biggest things that I like, when I watch Ohio State is the Jeremiah Smith show. Like, I
yeah.
mean, it's kind of like the way I would relate it to is it's like the girl you had a crush on in high school dating like the douchebag guy, and you're just like, damn, you're so hot and you're just so good, but you're dating the douchebag. Like, oh, you could do
It could be
better.
so much better.
I know. And it's like, and too, because you're just like, yo, we have a good quarterback. Look at what we're doing. Look what look. And again, this is no knock to Restrepo or Horton or any of our wide receivers, but Jeremiah Smith, he's a once in a generation talent, and we're seeing that. Is Zach Williams the wide receiver from Alabama?
Travis, oh, hold
No,
on.
no.
Ryan
Who's the wide
Williams.
fresh?
Sorry, Ryan Williams.
Ryan Williams, the wide receiver for Alabama right now. He's those two freshmen going back and forth is a lot. It reminds me a lot of the Sammy Sosa, Mark McGuire home run
I,
competition because they're both like at 18 touchdowns each, and they're just lighting up the stat board. Like to me, like it's insane watching Jeremiah Smith do what he does, and the push off one hand Randy Moss catch he against Iowa this past game was. I'm just like every time I watch, as much as I hate Ohio State, I just am like, maybe they are legit. I mean, we're going to find out when we talk about them against Oregon, but we will see. I mean, I think you can agree whoever wins this Oregon Ohio State game, Rudy, is probably the favorite for the Big Ten, right?
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Now to a conference that is in big trouble. There's big trouble for the Big 12, in my opinion. No one is standing out as a favorite currently right now, except for BYU, who remains undefeated, even though the Red Raiders of Texas Tech are on top of the conference. Most of our preseason favorites right now have already had a loss, so we will have to wait and see how the chaos ensues in the Big 12. Currently, there are 5 teams who remain unbeaten in conference play, which is wild to me. Sadly, no teams in the top 10, with only 4 teams representing the Big 12 in the top 25. Rudy, who do you think is going to win the Big 12?
Your guess is as good as mine because it's looking a lot like they replaced Oklahoma and Texas and they brought in a couple of group of 5 schools and it's playing out exactly like the old Big 12 where everyone's putting up points and everyone's beating
Yeah.
each other and nobody knows what's going on and all it does is hurt their chances of getting into the college football playoff. Thank goodness they have the one automatic bid to get one
Yeah.
school representation in, but it's not going to help them in terms of getting in at large. So yeah, BYU's playing the most physical football. That's for sure. I think they've been underestimated, throughout the year. The beatdown they put down on K-State a couple of weeks ago, I think was kind of them announcing themselves. Also, the way that they beat SMU of the ACC, that's the one
Yeah.
loss for SMU.
Yep.
Just playing
Oh, that was a tight
physical
game too, by the way.
football.
That was a tight game.
It was
I think it was only
tight,
a
but
one. I think it was a one score game that ended. So yeah, that's again credit to SMU and the ACC. But yeah,
yeah.
I agree with you. I think what's really strange about the Big 12 was they let all these teams in to the conference, right? And all those teams are succeeding. Like, I mean, granted, Arizona and Arizona each have a loss, but they look great in Big 12 play. I think what's really strange is we've got Colorado, Iowa State, Texas Tech, and West Virginia, along with BYU, as undefeated in conference play right now, which
Yeah.
go figure. You know what
And
I mean? Go figure.
K-State goes to Colorado this weekend too, so that's gonna be a great game.
I mean, yeah, I mean, these games, it's to me, it's sad. I feel a little bad for the Big 12 because there's so much competition, which we all knew going into the season. We knew it was going to be a shootout. We thought, I mean, in my opinion, I thought K-State or Oklahoma State were going to be the front runners in the conference. But to see, BYU, see Colorado, I mean, who? If I told you 2 weeks out from the season, hey, by week 7, Colorado is going to be undefeated in conference play, would you have believed me?
Yeah.
You
This
know?
is kind of a hot take, but I'll tell you the Big 12 survived and the Pac 12 died not because of competition, but because they just had a better conference office and commissioner in terms of how to negotiate their deal. Because if you looked at a purely competition standpoint, I actually had the Big 12 as the bottom of the Power Five, and I had ACC right there at number 4, nipping at their heels in a race at the bottom in terms of just overall
I agree.
competition and how anybody could beat anybody any given week because nobody played defense in that conference. And that's kind
Yeah,
of been the same.
I I would agree. I think it's kind of like the wheel of chaos or wheel of whatever they used to call it on ESPN for the
Yes.
ACC. I think it's the same. I think it's now with the Big 12. I mean, I never had a clear winner coming out of that. I didn't feel confident, and now going into week 7, I still don't. I think you're gonna. I know this is gonna sound crazy. I think we're gonna get if BYU does lose. I think we're going to have at least a 2-loss Big 12 team getting into the playoff. You know,
Yeah.
I just see team. I don't see anyone getting out of there unbeaten unless maybe BYU. But again, BYU does BYU things. They're kind of like the Clemson of the West. I feel like they do really good and they look really good, and then they pull a BYU and they lose to a random team. And so we're gonna have to wait and see, like we've been saying for each of these conferences. But going into a group that desperately needs help as well, the group of 5. Wow, this is a group of people that let's just look at this really quick. Army and Navy undefeated.
First time that both of them have been undefeated at the same time since 1945.
Like
Literally.
what?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how legit they are. We're gonna have to wait and see. I mean, they both got stud dual threat quarterbacks who have been putting up 15 touchdowns. I think the Army quarterbacks put up 15 touchdowns. Navy stud quarterback, dual threat quarterback, has nearly 800 yards in the air and nearly 600 yards on the ground with 17 touchdowns. And just to give you an idea, you're like, oh, how many touchdowns is that? Cam Ward's got 18. So
Yeah.
these quarterbacks are not far behind Cam Ward in putting up touchdowns. And then also Army has a stout defense that's only allowing 9.8 points per game. Like, go figure. And
Well,
they're both ranked first in the
yeah.
American.
It's just that style of play. I mean, when you look at the service academies, the good news is one of them is going to beat each other because they play at the end of the year after
And then
everyone
they both play
else's
Notre Dame.
season's over, and they both play Notre Dame, which
Yeah.
great test for them because those triple option style of offenses, it makes your defense look better because you're holding time of possession so much. I mean, remember our trauma from Paul Johnson over at Georgia Tech. That's a tough offense to stop if you're not fully disciplined. So if you're not on your assignment, it's the most pure like hat on hat football in terms of playing man defense you could find. So if you play really, really stout, you can annihilate a triple option offense. But if you can't, it's a long day. So
Yeah.
I'm
And you
sure
got to
that
play
it
real
helps in terms of
discipline.
that. Yeah, that
And we
9.5 points a game.
and not only that, but like you also have to play if you're Notre Dame, you got to play a little bit more consistently than you have all season.
Yeah,
And Notre Dame's had that problem all season where they're up and they're down. They're blowing Purdue out by like 66, and then they're losing to Northern Illinois. Like it's going to be very interesting to see them both play Notre Dame. But another team that's in the group of 5 that we should all be keeping our eye on is Boise State. I mean, despite
yeah,
that loss to Oregon, they are running away. They're being carried by their Heisman running back Ashton Genty, who like I said, only have a loss and one loss, and the rest of their schedule is very, very manageable moving forward. With UNLV maybe being their only threat, maybe Oregon State because they're a Power 5 school, or like they're a Pac-12, but I mean they realistically can win out.
yeah.
Speaking of UNLV, I think UNLV they're out.
No.
That loss to
Yeah.
Syracuse. I mean, barring Boise State losing again, I mean, if they beat Boise State, do you think they're back in contention?
I mean, you can't count them out if they get that win, but a one-loss group of five, it's just a matter of where everybody else finishes out. I mean,
Mm.
look, if Army or Navy end up beating Notre Dame and staying, undefeated, that's just a compelling story on its own. It's one of those where let's see how everyone else plays out. That's where I'd look at that piece.
Yeah, I think the
UNLV, like, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the UNLV uh, storyline hinges directly on Boise State. That's going to be their championship game. That's going to be their Super Bowl. For the pure fact that like the next team we'll talk about, Liberty, they're undefeated, still viable, but their schedule is weak.
Yeah,
It's easy. It's very easy for them to win out. I mean, here's a surprising stat. Both their offense and defense are top 30 teams, squads. I mean,
yeah, but again, you look at like it's one thing to use that criticism of a Power Five and say that their schedule isn't as great. They like to knock Miami's schedule, but if you look at the strength of schedule so far through the year, it's actually pretty good compared to everybody else in the country. Liberty, you can't make that same argument because just the
no,
eye test of watching them play FIU this week, the one thing that stands out to me is that yeah, they're a basketball team. They run a very efficient, fast offense. They're very mobile. They're very versatile in the sense of that they can get speed on the outside. They can throw the ball quickly, but size wise, that team can't line up with most of the country. We talked about it earlier in the show where I kind of brought it up at the very beginning, but this team doesn't beat middle of the road Power Four conference anybody because
I
if you
agree.
just watch their offensive line, they look to be the same size as our linebackers, to be
Yeah.
perfectly honest. So it's one of
No.
those where they might look good at the beginning, but over the course of 4 quarters, that doesn't stand up. And if you put them against an Army, I think Army annihilates Liberty.
Yeah. So
Sorry, Army annihilating Liberty, military coups, and all sorts of
exactly.
other. We're former news guys, so when you hear a word like that together, I went, "Ooh,
Yeah.
don't like that." They're
So
gonna
out of
clean or
these,
shave them.
out, it's a banana
Sorry,
republic, college football. So
exactly. That's the
of
Bahamas
these,
Bowl.
of the Bahamas Bowl, be perfect. That's who the group of five two teams should play in. But out of these five teams that we've mentioned, who do you think comes out as the favorite for the group of five?
Right now, I'm going Boise State just
Yeah.
because I think in terms of storyline, like if they're able to keep winning out or even if they're in a pool of other one loss teams where it's like this team beat this team that beat that team that lost this team, Boise State's been looking for this opportunity to play with the big boys
Yep.
since that 2007 Fiesta Bowl where they have the Statue of Liberty to beat Oklahoma. Jared Zabransky and all those guys, and what was it, Ian Johnson, the two like big players for Boise State. Um, this is their story to say, hey, here's your opportunity. It's coming, 17 years later, but here it is. So I'm going to go with them until they prove me otherwise.
Yeah, I agree. I think that loss to Oregon, especially if Oregon beats Ohio State this week, will look really good for them. And so I think their destiny is in their own hands. They just need to win out. And again, barring UNLV and Oregon State, who I think are their only challenges,
Yeah.
realistically, they can win out. And I think they're going to be in the college football playoff. But bakery season is over, and we have to get to the previews for week 7. Rudy, we've got some incredible games this week. Let's
Yeah.
talk about the first one, the Red River Shootout, Oklahoma versus Texas in the Cotton Bowl. 3:30, not a high noon kickoff. What are you thinking? What are your takeaways?
Uh, I'll put it this way. I think Oklahoma keeps it close. I think, look, Oklahoma being the dog usually ends up winning this game the past few years. Everyone thinks, oh, Texas is going to blow them out. Oklahoma comes right up and says, not so fast, my friend, to take an old Lee Corso reference out there.
Yeah,
So I don't know if they outright get the win against Texas, but I think they make it closer than everyone expects it to be because their defense is playing a little bit better. They're forcing a lot of turnovers, which is great. Something that Texas has some issues with ball security regardless of whether it's Arch Manning or I think you said that Quinn Ewers is coming back.
Quinn Ewers is returning for this game, and he will be starting. Exactly.
Well, let's see how that plays out for them. I think it helps for sure, but I think it's closer than the experts say.
Yeah, and then just to hammer that point home, 9 of the 11 last games played in the Red River Shootout have been decided by one score. Both teams are coming off a bye week, so they're both really ready. Like you mentioned, Ewers is returning. What I think is interesting and a really um, important aspect of this game that we're going to have to keep an eye on is Texas is 10th in passing yards. Oklahoma is 75th in pass defense. So
Yeah.
like we're going to have to see how those Texas wide receivers match up against those Oklahoma cornerbacks, because if Ewer starts airing it out and it's becoming very easy for him, this game will get ugly very fast. But I think Oklahoma could stay in the game and possibly win. Not really, but their only way of winning is that Oklahoma is third in takeaways per game this season so far. So if
Yeah.
Oklahoma can get a little bit of those turnovers, maybe score some points on defense or put their offense in a good position field wise, I think like we said, Oklahoma can stay in the game. I don't think they're going to win though. Sadly, I'm taking Texas over. Um, Oklahoma. So we're both in agreement. Texas over Oklahoma, right? For the
Yep.
Red River Shootout. On to the battle in Eugene. We have OSU, we have Ohio State versus Oregon. Both teams getting their first major test of the season. Both teams are 1-2 in point differential. So they're just blowing the teams out against their respective competition. This is the only challenge, in my opinion, for Oregon this season. So
Oregon. Yeah.
I
Yeah. That's
think I think the winner of this will determine the Big Ten champion. Not even who goes just to the championship, because I think it will do that as well. But I think realistically, let's say Penn State wins out, or they win this weekend and they lose to an Ohio State or Michigan, which I doubt they will. But if they lose and they make it to the championship, I still think the winner of this game will still win in Indy. What do you think?
I think this could be round one in a two-part rematch in the Big Ten
Ooh,
championship game. So I'm going to say quack, 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 Mr. Ducksworth, and say that Oregon gets this one because home field is a big deal over there in Oregon. And I look, as great as Jeremiah Smith is, I just don't. I'm not sold on Ohio State yet. They could totally prove me wrong this week, and I'll happily eat my words in the reaction show earlier next week. But for now, I'm going Oregon.
I hate, I hate Ohio State,
Yeah.
but I got to take them. They just look, again, Jeremiah Smith is a freak of nature. He is insanely talented. I think it's just the Ohio State offense has been trucking. And them bulldozing Iowa, who is known for having a stout defense, like they're known for holding teams like under 30 points. For them to get the 40 plus points that they got really kind of opened my eyes. And this is the other problem I have. Every time I say Ohio State is mediocre or they're not ready for the SEC or they're not ready for these big games, they come up and they make it to the playoff or they make it to the championship. And this is another one of those Ohio State squads where I after off the bat, I was like, they haven't played anyone. They're not gonna be that good. They're gonna face a real squad and get their stuff pushed in, and they haven't. And so to me, I think Oregon, while great, and again, they're 1-2 in point differential. So they're the ones who are blowing teams out this season. I still think Oregon State, Ohio State goes to Eugene, leaves with the dub. Leaves with the dub. Um, Next we have Penn State versus USC. This is another Big Ten matchup, which is it's still weird. Again,
It's
USC
wild.
being a Big Ten, and Penn State will be traveling to the West Coast. What are you looking at in this game?
I've been saying this. I said it last week. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear that weird like whistling in the background. Something's going on somewhere
That's
on my
my.
floor outside.
Is it
Yeah.
yours or it's probably mine? It's probably my kids who are screaming in the background. So if you're hearing that, it's probably from me.
Uh, okay. Sorry.
Is that what you hear right there?
Yes.
That's my kids.
Oh.
Don't have kids, people. Don't have kids.
What one thing before going back onto it too, I might have a call from a recruiter coming at like 5. He was going to check in on me on something. So if I happen to like say, "Hey, 1 second,"
Mhm.
I'll happily like redo it. I gotta take this call if it comes in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But go ahead. Your key takeaways from the USC Penn State game.
I'll tell you what, I said this for the past couple of weeks. I think Penn State's overrated. I haven't seen them really handle anybody very
Ooh.
well. I know that sometimes the score looks better than the way the game was played, and I'm watching it. I'm going, they haven't convinced me yet. And USC coming off of now 2 losses, I think it's the reverse situation of what we've been talking about. Every time a former Pac-12 school and a Big 10 team are crossing over the country to play each other, this screams trap game to me for Penn State, because they haven't looked that great against what I would argue is lesser competition. So I'm going to take USC because it's at home, and I think they're going to be humming on offense. And as much as like USC's defense has struggled, I think they could score enough points to pull that out. So I'm taking USC.
I'm actually going to do the exact opposite. USC has had a, bro, I have given up on USC. I mean, I questioned them at the beginning of the season. Now 6 weeks in, I'm doing the same. USC has a weak O and D line, and Penn State loves and will run the ball. I
Yep.
think it's USC's defense is really hurting. I think 3 turnovers in the Minnesota game, 8 turnovers total in the last 3 games are going to play a factor. Fun fact: Penn State has no one has sacked and gotten to the quarterback more in the last 3 years than Penn State. They're number 2 in pressures this season. So to me, it's like you have a team that can get to the quarterback and that is number 2 in pressures this season and has sacked quarterbacks more than any other team in the last 3 years, playing a D line that has been abysmal, like literally abysmal. And so I think with a USC D line that's already been thin with the absence of Bear Alexander entering, the pouting purgatory that he put himself in,
Yeah.
and then the loss of their star linebacker Eric Gentry. I think that's something. He's on concussion protocol. I think again, it's if I tell you you're going to lose a key D lineman and you're going to lose a key linebacker, and you're playing a team that loves and can run the ball, it's not a good look. And so I'm taking Penn State for a big win. I'm saying at least 1 to 2 touchdowns. I don't know, but you know what? You're right. Maybe that West Coast, that time zone affects Penn State, and they can slow them down. We have 2 bounce back games in the SEC that I kind of want to get a quick synopsis from you from. Bama versus South Carolina. What are you thinking? You think Bama gets a revenge game and they get back into SEC competition, or do you think they drop one again and continue start a losing streak?
It's at home in Tuscaloosa. And look, if Bama drops a second game after that loss to South Carolina,
Oh
Bama's got
yeah,
big problems. I
Bama,
don't
they're going to
really
be rioting. They're going to be rioting in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah. They'll be crying in the Paul Feinbaum show for the rest of eternity. I can't believe they dropped 2 straight. Well, you know what? I think Bama bad. They bounce back. They bounce
Yeah.
back. I think they get their anger out on South Carolina because eh, that last week game was such an anomaly. It's one thing to see like how they got the ball ran on them and how they just got outclassed by Vandy in terms of strategy, preparation, a little bit of desperation too, but it's just like the perfect storm that came through to knock them off. And I don't see themselves getting caught with their pants down 2 weeks in a row.
Yeah, I feel bad for South Carolina because I think they're going to lose 2 weeks in a row, even though it's Cocktober. This is going to be a very uneventful Cocktober for the Gamecocks this
Very
year, and
sad Cocktober for them.
very sad Cocktober. And so I think they're definitely going down. I think Alabama's going to bounce back and bounce back big. I think it's going to be a bloodbath as well. I think that they're ready for revenge. I think Kalen DeBoer is going to have something to prove as well. So we'll see. Tennessee versus UF. We have one team going down. We have another team gaining confidence. What's happening?
How do you want this game to go? Here's what I'm trying to figure out. Though it's one thing to lose a game like Bama did and expect them to bounce back. It's another thing to lose a game the way Tennessee did. They
Mhm.
didn't look that great in that loss. There's mistakes there that makes me
Yeah.
wonder, are these cracks beginning to form in terms of this defense, not defense, but the offense? Is the offense as delicate as they showed against Arkansas? If that's something that Billy Napier can figure out, they could look pretty good. So if you're the way I look at this as a Miami fan, selfishly and schemingly, do you want Florida to win this game? Because
Absolutely.
is this the game that saves Billy Napier from what everyone thought was already like done and dusted, and they're just waiting for the right time? Like if UCF went into Gainesville in the swamp and beat Florida, I think Napier's gone before he makes it back to the locker room. Now with that momentum, if he beats Tennessee, he's making an argument that, hey, my system's working. We just got off to a weird start and Graham Mertz got hurt and that, kept us for a couple games. And, the system is there. The belief is there. You could argue that Florida, wins this one, but they have to go to Neyland Stadium and do it up in Tennessee. And look, I like Josh Heupel as a coach. As much as I hate that inside shovel pass, I think they figure it out, and I think Tennessee wins because at the end of the day, Florida's problems aren't inspiration; it's just personnel, man-on-man personnel, and it's one thing to play former Group of Five, arguably still kind of Group of Five UCF, and playing Tennessee. So I'm taking the Vols.
Yeah, I think the Vols will win, but I am rooting for the Gators only for the pure fact I need them to look good so that we look good.
Yeah.
But I mean, here's the thing, right? Tennessee will do Tennessee things, and Tennessee does not like winning against the Gators for whatever reason. I don't
It's
know
true.
why.
It's
They
true.
do not play Florida well, and even years where Florida's a garbage team somehow gets the key win. So I think I want to say Tennessee, but I also see UF gaining steam, and I see Tennessee struggling to put points up again. And I think it'll be closer than the experts think, you know. But if UF does win, which I hope they do for us, I just don't see that saving Billy Napier's job.
Yeah, look, it's one of those where that's a wild scenario. I'm wondering what they're going to do with the rest of the season because just like we mentioned, a couple minutes ago, I thought he was already gone. I thought
Yeah.
the basement comment was not going to stand and that they were going to just win out. But if he gets some momentum and he wins this game, and I think Florida State's a given for them. But if they find another one or two wins in a season in a schedule that was supposed to be at this point, for the rest of the season, they were supposed to be in the worst of it. And my dog is now squeaking his toy.
Oh,
So
you're
that's
good.
how
He's
entertained
excited.
he is by it. Other than that, I mean, the only other thing I wanted to really touch on was kind of a couple of other trap games that are not as big in terms of national landscape, but like from Miami, Louisville at UVA, big test for them, see how they bounce back. And I talked about this last episode because I just totally skipped my mind that Notre Dame was off last week. As bad as Stanford looked against Virginia Tech, I think they give Notre Dame problems.
We will see. I don't know. I think Notre Dame's still. I think they're clicking and I think they're a little too much for Stanford. The reason why I want to go back to the Tennessee UF thing, the reason why I don't think Tennessee, even if Florida wins, I think the blowout that they're going to receive to Georgia and then the potential loss to Florida State will
Yeah.
just erase that. Like it'll be so far in their memory that they'll be like, no, 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 no. But Rudy, dogs, kids aside, we have put another one in the books. I want to thank everyone for watching. Thank you for sticking around this long. It was a long one, but it was a good one, I think so. Until next week, be good, win the weekend. And even though our Canes are off, I'm still going to say, go Canes. We'll see you
Okay,
guys
win the
next
bye
week.
week.